And it's recording.
When I was a kid, my family and I lived in a modest house in West Virginia. As I said, it was quite small, and there was a large forest behind my house. I was pretty curious, as any small child is, and so I'd always find myself asking to go into the woods. My parents would consent, but I was never allowed to go near the river that was located deep in the forest. At first, I was slightly disappointed, but I never gave it a second thought and decided not to question what they said. Being an only child at 8 years old, things could get pretty lonely. I was a recluse of sorts, but had a big imagination, so I always created a multitude of friends to play with me in the woods, but they never left the wilderness, so I ended up going back home to discuss the adventures I had with my parents over dinner. One day, after my dad left for his classes at the seminary, he wanted to be a pastor at our local church. I decided to go on a short walk in the woods, considering it was an Act 80 day and I was off from school. I put on my jacket and found my shoes with the help of my mom and quickly rushed out into the imaginary kingdom within the confines of the forest. When I reached the point of the woods that I never went past, my mind became particularly curious. I got tired of limiting myself to just having a small amount of woods to play in, so I slowly made my way past gnarled tree roots and low-hanging branches, thorny underbrush, and overgrown weeds until I finally ended up finding the oh-so-infamous river my parents told me to stay away from. It had a strong current, looked like pretty rough waters. I peered across the river to the forest, seemed to thicken substantially. Through the thin trunks and massive amount of branches, I saw something moving, a shadow of some sort. Whatever it was seemed to be advancing closer and closer to the other side of the river, until finally the shadow came out into the clearing. It was a man. Emaciated, lanky, and over 6 feet tall, he silently watched me from across the river. Being a lonely little girl, my first thought was that he could be a friend. I smiled and waved, but I got no reaction. On closer inspection, I realized that the man had a small grin on his face. For some reason, the grin scared me a little, but I was intrigued, so I decided to leave. The next day after school, I went back. Then it became a daily thing. I didn't mind his grin after a while. I thought it was cute. He never crossed the river, but we still found a way to play, and somehow we created a bond with each other. One day my father asked me what I actually did in the woods. I guess it did seem a little weird. A little girl going into the woods by herself on a daily basis. There can't be that much to do. I told him I had made a friend. He laughed. Oh, really? What's his name? Well, he can't talk, or at least I don't think he can. Thinking nothing of it, he let it go, and I visited my friend every day per usual. One day he finally told me his name. I ran to the river, smiling out of anticipation. It was like any other day. He was on the other side of the river, but instead of his normal half grin, he was smiling, teeth showing. It wouldn't seem like that big of a deal except for the fact that his teeth were pointed, all of them. Every once in a while, a forked tongue would sniff the air through his slimy yellow fangs. I gasped. My friend once again became a figure of slight terror. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet were stuck. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't avert my eyes. After I collected myself a little, I turned to run. As soon as I took my first step back, however, he spoke for the first time. "What is your name, child?" "Cassie. My name is Cassie Littleman." His smile widened. "My name is Levi." I ran. The way he said it, his voice, I knew I never wanted to visit him ever again. It was awful. It was like he was whispering in my ear, even though the river was crashing loudly against itself, and even though he was standing across the river, it wasn't like any voice I've ever heard before. It was unearthly, As I turned and started to run, I heard him calling me, "Please, don't leave me, Cassie." But I couldn't stay. I had to get out of there. I think I might have been crying. I can't remember. I ran home and practically attacked my father. "Oh, gosh, sweetheart, what's the matter?" My friend in the woods, he has pointed teeth. He's scary." "Oh, sweetie, it's just your imagination. Don't get too worked up over it. If your friend bothers you that much, don't go into the woods anymore." It made sense, and I never wanted to see that thing again, so I didn't go back for months. I actually became kind of a recluse. I was scared to leave my house. I felt like he'd be there, waiting for me. I was sleeping when I heard it crying. I jumped a little and tiptoed to my window. I got a clear view of the woods, but I didn't see anything. I heard someone speak through the tears, but I couldn't put a face on the muffled, contorted voice, and I didn't know where the voice was coming from, so I went downstairs to try to get away from it, but it got much louder. "I miss you. Please come to me, Cassie. I love you. I'll miss you so much." I didn't want to follow the voice. I really didn't. But something told me to follow it. Something in me told me to console whatever or whoever was in pain because of me. So I went outside. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew exactly where to go. I headed toward the woods. I walked a little until I got to the river, and then everything clicked. I panicked. I started to cry, and I looked around watching for Levi this or whatever the hell his name was. I heard rustling. The talking was now replaced with horrid, inhuman screams of agony and pain. I couldn't see him, but I heard him speak. "Why did you leave me? I needed you. You were my only friend, and you abandoned me." He appeared at the other side of the river a few minutes later. I was too terrified to speak. He wiped away his tears. "Oh, I'm sorry, Cassie. I just love you so much. You're my only friend. Please come play with me across the river. Please cross the river for me." I considered it. He was lonely, like me. Then I remembered what my mother had told me during the months that I wouldn't leave the house. I can't say I'm happy with the fact that you don't go outside anymore, but I am glad that you're steering clear of the woods. That river has a notorious reputation. So many children have drowned. It's odd. I made the connection. I screamed. I wouldn't let him into my head. I had to get out. I told him I had to go, but he kept coaxing me. He promised me happiness and games and fruit and a nice long life with him. All I had to do was cross the river. All I had to do was take the plunge. Despite what my mother had said, I took a step closer. I was so incredibly lonely. I just wanted a friend. In June of 2004, Cassie Littleman's body was found lying gutted on the far side of the Shavers Fork River. There were bite marks covering almost every inch of her body.